Dr. Weston Price was a dentist and dental researcher whose search for the causes of physical degeneration and dental decay took him all over the world to live with and investigate the diets of those traditional native populations who were pictures of exceptional health. This included the Swiss, Eskimos, Polynesians, Africans, New Zealanders, and many others, but always in remote tribal communities which had remained on their traditional diets as they were still far removed from industrialized society and modern refined foods. He found that these populations continued to exhibit perfect physical and dental health into old age, and he wrote about the traditional foods that they consumed, which kept them in such fabulous condition. His book, Nutrition and Physical Degeneration, which the Foundation continues to publish and sell every year, is still the only book of its kind, and his research is still being quoted at current scientific, medical, and nutritional conferences around the world.
What made these people so healthy? Why is it that they didn't have the degenerative diseases that we have today? And there are many reasons, of course. But again, getting back to whole foods, and regardless of what kind of diet one has, because Price's peoples were all different in terms of their diet, depending on where they lived, what the climate was, what kind of soil, for example. But the underlying unifying factor with all of them was that they were not eating refined, revitalized foods. They were eating foods which were grown in the area in which they lived, which meant they ate foods that were seasonally ready to eat.
When Dr. Price began his travels back in the 1930s, he found degenerative disease was on the rise back then.
Price looked upon the mouth, being a dentist of course, he looked upon the mouth as being the window to the rest of the body. And because teeth were more readily accessible and easier to photograph and spot, he obviously emphasized that in his pictures. Most of Price's pictures are people with their mouths open for that very reason. But that was only the tip of the iceberg, because the high incidence of cavities was indicative not only of just poor oral health, but it was indicative of overall skeletal health and overall body health as well. Price took the foods that the societies he investigated back to his laboratory. He had samples sent back there and he analyzed them. And he found, for example, that the food values in those foods in many of the very important nutrients, such as omega-3 fatty acids, which are, as you know, finally being, quote, rediscovered, unquote, almost 10 times higher than what we have in today's diet. Our diets today are very high in omega-6s, which come primarily from grains and grain seed oils. It's a total reversal of the balance between omega-3s and 6s that Price's peoples had.
Dr. Francis Marion Pottenger Jr. was a medical doctor who was best known for his famous 10-year nutritional feeding study that he carried out with many hundreds of cats. The cats were divided into different groups where they were fed either cooked or raw animal-based foods, such as cooked meat versus raw meat, cooked or rather pasteurized dairy versus raw dairy. And the study describes in detail all of the physical and emotional problems which developed in the cooked diet animals but never occurred in those on the healthy raw foods. The cooked diet cats never even got past the third generation, since they lost fertility and the ability to reproduce. Just as today, we have more and more clinics specializing in using drugs to help people who have become unable to give birth to children. The study, and the book we sell which describes it, still stands alone in its ability to show the effects of consuming denatured foods as the population currently does at every meal.
Pottenger found that 30% raw and 70% cooked didn't fly. It wouldn't maintain health. But 50-50, he still felt you could get along.
Those cats fed on a 100% raw diet thrived. The third generation looked just as healthy as the first generation. That's all documented in the Pottenger book called Pottenger's Cats.
Pottenger found with the cats the same types of degeneration from the impoverished food, or the, in his case, cooked food as well, that Price saw, where the trading posts and modern people coming in to help the primitives were destroying them.
The fascinating thing about the Pottenger cat studies is that in many ways they tie in with some of Dr. Price's research. Pottenger found that in the three groups of cats which he isolated and fed diets ranging from all raw to 1/3 raw and 2/3 cooked, exhibited certain skeletal changes over the generations of the cats. The groups that were fed more of the cooked diet and less proportionally of the raw diet started developing and showed skeletal deformities primarily in the skull itself. And this is interesting because Price found the same thing with the primitive groups that he visited. When they had gone on refined foods, he also noticed, and you'll see the pictures in his book, Nutritional and Physical Degeneration, the narrowing of the jaw, the lifting of the upper palate, and the crowding of the teeth, which shows that the diet for cats that were fed the more proportions of the cooked food was not proper for that particular kind of animal. They weren't getting some of the nutrients that were needed to build proper skeletal shapes. And it was the same thing with the peoples. Now, when one looks around today, we can see a lot of evidence of the kind of diets that we have degenerated into as a society to a greater or lesser extent. And those reflect back again on what Price was talking about, and that is the more food that we use that is displacing those foods that have nutrient value, the more we are likely to be prone to things like osteoporosis and skeletal deformities and cavities in the teeth, things of that nature.